I'll never forget the look on his face. That smirk, like he was doing me a favor. Effective immediately. We're terminating your employment, Dominic said, leaning back in his leather chair, fingers steepled like some movie villain. Let's be honest, Acacia. With $5 million in your pocket now, you don't need this job anymore. There are people out there who actually need the income. My hands started shaking. 3 weeks. That's how long I'd managed to keep my lottery win private. 3 weeks of coming to work like nothing had changed, of eating the same sad desk lunches, of taking the bus to save money. And now here he was, firing me because I'd finally caught one break in my life. But my performance reviews have been stellar, I whispered, feeling my cheeks burn. I've brought in more clients than anyone else on the team this quarter. And we appreciate that contribution, he said, not even looking at me now, already typing something on his computer. But let's not pretend this is anything but a favor to you. Rich people don't work 70-hour weeks in middle management. That's when I noticed Veronica, his executive assistant, watching through the glass wall, eyes wide, hand covering her mouth, and Marcus from accounting, and Taylor from marketing. They all knew. Everyone knew. I'd like to collect my things, I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady despite the hurricane inside my chest. No need, Dominic replied, sliding a cardboard box across his desk. We've already packed up your desk. Security will escort you out. That's when I realized they'd gone through my personal belongings before even telling me I was fired. That's how they found the lottery confirmation letter I'd stupidly printed and forgotten in my notebook. I stood there, 29 years old, $5 million richer, and somehow feeling more worthless than I ever had in my life. Before I go any further with what happened next, could you please take a moment to drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from? This story took so much for me to share, and knowing it's reaching people around the world would mean everything to me right now. Okay, so I guess I should introduce myself properly. I'm Acacia Holloway. Most people call me Ace. Before all this happened, I was a project coordinator at one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the city. 5 years I'd given them. 5 years of canceled vacations, missed family events, and stress migraines that would knock me out for days. The lottery win was pure chance. I hardly ever played, maybe 5 times in my entire life. It was my neighbor Eliza's birthday, and we'd grabbed tickets as a silly celebration. She didn't win anything. I hit for $5 million. After taxes, it came to about $2.8 million. Life-changing, absolutely, but not private island money, you know? I wasn't planning to quit immediately. I wanted to be smart, set up investments, maybe look for a career I actually loved instead of one that just paid the bills. That's why I kept working and kept quiet about it. Well, until Dominic found out. Let me tell you about Dominic Thorne, 45 years old, executive partner, the kind of man who wore cufflinks that cost more than my monthly rent and made sure everyone knew it. His father was golfing buddies with 2 former senators. His wife came from old money, like really old money. But the thing about Dominic wasn't just that he was rich and powerful. It was how he wielded that power. In the 3 years he'd been at the firm, 11 women had left. 11. All talented, all rising stars, all suddenly gone after one-on-one meetings with him. HR never did anything because technically, he never said anything explicitly inappropriate. He just made it impossible for women to succeed unless they played by his specific rules. I was walking out of the building, clutching that sad box of my belongings, when Veronica caught up to me by the elevators. "Ace, I'm so sorry," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "He went through your desk himself. He saw the letter and completely flipped out." "Why would he care?" I asked, still in shock. "Why would he even care if I won money?" Veronica bit her lip. "You know that huge Westlake project you brought in last month? The one worth 7 figures to the firm?" I nodded. That project had taken me months of relationship building and research. "He's taking full credit for it at the board meeting tomorrow. He's been telling everyone you were underperforming and that he's been carrying you." When he found out about the money, she trailed off, looking genuinely scared. "He said you were probably distracted, planning how to spend it instead of focusing on your clients." The elevator arrived, and a security guard appeared beside me. Miss Holloway, I need to escort you out now. That elevator ride down 32 floors was the longest minute of my life. I stood there, surrounded by coworkers who wouldn't meet my eyes, clutching a box of desk plants and family photos, while my entire professional reputation was being shredded above me. The first night after being fired, I sat in my tiny apartment, the same one bedroom I'd had since college, with the leaky faucet and temperamental heating, and stared at the wall. $5 million in my bank account, and I felt completely powerless. I ordered takeout from the Thai place down the street, the same green curry I always got when I was sad, and I cried. Just sat there and cried while my food got cold. Not because I needed the job for money anymore, but because Dominic had taken something from me that felt irreplaceable, my dignity. The next morning, I called Eliza. "He can't do that," she said immediately. "You should sue for wrongful termination." I laughed, but it came out hollow. Sue Dominic Thorne? The man whose family has a wing named after them at the law school? His sister-in-law is a judge, Eliza. So what? You're just going to let him get away with it? After what he's done to you and all those other women? That question hung in the air between us. Was I going to let him get away with it? I spent the next week in a fog. I'd wake up with no alarm, make coffee, and then just exist. Sometimes I'd look at real estate listings. Sometimes I'd research financial advisors. But mostly, I thought about Dominic's smirk as he fired me. It was during this time that the messages started coming in. First from Taylor in marketing. "Just heard Dominic tell the Westlake clients that you were let go for ethical violations. WTF? Then, from my former assistant, "They're making me sign an NDA about your departure. This feels wrong." And finally, from Marcus in accounting. "Thorne just announced he's redistributing your client accounts to more reliable team members. He specifically mentioned your lottery win as evidence you weren't serious about your career." People are uncomfortable, but nobody's saying anything. That was when something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about losing my job anymore. This was about a powerful man deciding that my story didn't matter, that he could rewrite it however he wanted, and no one would stop him. I opened my laptop and created a new document. At the top, I typed, "The truth about Dominic Thorne." It started as just a way to process my thoughts, documenting everything I'd seen and experienced in my 5 years at the firm, the women who'd left, the clients who'd been misled, the credit that had been stolen. But as the document grew, something else grew with it, a plan. Dominic Thorne thought money made him untouchable. He thought his connections protected him from consequences. He thought he could discard people like they were nothing. But he'd never faced someone with nothing to lose, and the resources to stand their ground. 2 weeks after being fired, I rented a small office in a nondescript building downtown. I set up a simple desk, a comfortable chair, and a large whiteboard. Across the top of the whiteboard, I wrote, "Project Accountability." The first person I contacted was Veronica. I invited her for coffee at a quiet cafe 3 neighborhoods away from the firm. "I can't be seen talking to you," she said nervously, sunglasses on despite the cloudy day. "He's been on a rampage since you left. 2 more people have quit." "I'm not asking you to do anything that puts your job at risk," I assured her. "I just need information." "What kind of information?" Her fingers tapped anxiously on her coffee cup. "Dates, times, names. I need to know exactly who Dominic has hurt and how." Veronica stared at me for a long moment. "Why? What are you going to do?" I took a sip of my coffee before answering. "I'm going to make sure he never does it again." That meeting with Veronica was the first thread I pulled, but it wouldn't be the last. Over the next month, I met with 7 former employees who'd left because of Dominic. Each had a story more disturbing than the last. Sybil, a brilliant designer who'd been told her emotional nature made her unsuitable for client meetings. Zara, who'd been passed over for promotion 3 times while watching less qualified men advance. Nolan, who'd witnessed Dominic altering billing records but had been too afraid to report it. They all agreed to help, but they were scared. Dominic's reach was long, and his memory for slights was legendary. "He'll destroy us if he finds out," Zara warned me over dinner one night. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." "I understand exactly who I'm dealing with," I replied. "The question is, Does he understand who he's dealing with now? As my investigation deepened, I discovered something unexpected. The Westlake project, my final achievement at the firm before being fired, had a problem, a big one. The environmental impact assessment Dominic had submitted to the city planning board had been altered. The original report, which I had worked on with the environmental consultants, identified significant concerns about wetland disruption. The version submitted after I left removed those concerns entirely. I still had my original files, backed up on my personal cloud storage. The timestamps were clear. The report had been changed after I was gone. And just like that, I had my leverage point. But leverage alone wasn't enough. I needed to be strategic. Dominic had power, connections, and an image carefully cultivated over decades. A frontal assault would fail. I needed to be smarter. I formed a plan that required patience and precision. I would need allies, evidence, and perfect timing. Most importantly, I would need Dominic to believe he was still in control. And so began the most challenging performance of my life. Using a small portion of my lottery winnings, I established a shell company called Horizon Investments. Through this company, I approached the firm as a potential new client with a major development project. The budget I hinted at was substantial enough to catch attention, but not so large as to invite intense scrutiny. I hired Bennett, a former colleague who'd left the industry altogether, to act as my company's representative. His job was simple: request Dominic Thorne specifically as the lead architect and insist on comprehensive environmental assessments for the project site. Meanwhile, I reached out to Claudia Westlake, the head of the family behind the Westlake project. We'd developed a good rapport during my time bringing in their business. I requested a confidential meeting at her home, away from corporate eyes. "I've been hearing concerning things about how our project is being handled," she told me when we met, confirming my suspicions. "But no one at the firm will give me straight answers." I took a deep breath. What I was about to do would set everything in motion, with no possibility of turning back. "Ms. Westlake, I believe your project's environmental assessment has been tampered with," I said, sliding a folder across her coffee table. "These are the original findings, and these," I placed another folder beside it, "are what was submitted to the city." Claudia's face drained of color as she compared the documents. "This could destroy everything we've worked for. The Westlake name has always stood for environmental responsibility." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why I came to you first." She looked up at me, eyes sharp. "What do you want, Acacia?" "Justice," I replied simply. "And I have a plan to get it without damaging your family's project or reputation. But I'll need your help." As Claudia and I talked into the evening, the pieces of my plan locked into place. The trap was set. All we needed now was for Dominic to walk into it. I left Claudia's house that night feeling something I hadn't felt since the day I was fired: powerful. Not because of the money in my account, but because I had finally found a way to fight back that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. The next morning, I stood in front of my whiteboard, adding the final details to project accountability. My phone buzzed with a text from Bennett. "Meeting with Thorne confirmed for next Thursday." He took the bait. I stepped back and looked at the web of connections I'd mapped out, the evidence I'd gathered, and the timing I'd planned. In 1 week, everything would change. Not just for me, but for every person Dominic had ever stepped on in his climb to the top. For the first time in my life, I understood that sometimes justice doesn't come from following the rules. Sometimes, you have to rewrite them entirely. The night before the meeting with Dominic, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my apartment window, watching the city lights, thinking about the path that had led me here. $5 million hadn't changed my life the way everyone assumed it would. It hadn't made me happy. It had simply given me options I never had before. Thursday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't experienced in weeks. I dressed carefully in clothes I'd never worn to the firm, a deep burgundy suit that projected confidence without aggression. My hands were steady as I applied my makeup, as I slipped on the simple gold necklace my grandmother had given me before she died. "You look like you're going to war," Eliza commented as I passed her in the hallway. I smiled. In a way, I am. Bennett texted me when Dominic arrived at the conference room. "Eagle has landed. He brought Marcus from accounting and a junior architect named Gwen." "Perfect," Witnesses. I waited in a cafe across the street, watching the minutes tick by. According to our plan, Bennett would spend the first 30 minutes discussing the fictional development project, emphasizing the need for impeccable environmental assessments. Then, at exactly 10:30, Claudia Westlake would arrive, unannounced and unexpected. At 10:25, I left the cafe and crossed the street. My heart hammered in my chest, but my resolve was iron. I took the elevator to the 32nd floor, the same one I'd been escorted down in shame weeks earlier. This time, I held my head high. I timed my arrival perfectly. Just as I reached the conference room, I could see through the glass that Claudia had entered from the other door. The confusion on Dominic's face was palpable, even from where I stood. I opened the door and stepped inside. "Ms. Holloway?" Dominic's voice cracked slightly. "What is the meaning of this?" Bennett stood. "Mr. Thorne, allow me to properly introduce myself. I'm not actually from Horizon Investments. I'm here as a colleague of Ms. Holloway and Ms. Westlake." The color drained from Dominic's face as he looked between us. "I don't understand what's happening here." "That seems to be a pattern with you," I said, closing the door behind me. My voice was calm, measured, not understanding things, like the difference between original environmental reports and falsified ones. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Gwen, the junior architect, looked confused but attentive. Claudia placed a leather portfolio on the table. "Mr. Thorne, I've recently discovered some disturbing discrepancies in the environmental impact assessment for my family's project." "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding," Dominic said, recovering quickly, his smile returning. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Claudia replied firmly. "I think we need witnesses for this conversation." I moved to the head of the table, the position Dominic usually occupied during meetings. "Let me be clear about what's happening, Dominic. We have documented evidence that you altered environmental reports for the Westlake project after firing me. Reports that minimize significant environmental concerns." "That's preposterous," he sputtered. "And even if there were changes, they would have been approved through proper channels." "That's interesting," I said, "because I've spoken with the environmental assessment team. They never approved any changes. In fact, they're quite disturbed to learn their work was modified without their knowledge." Marcus cleared his throat. "Mr. Thorne, is this true? Were the reports altered?" The shift in the room was subtle but unmistakable. For perhaps the first time in his career, Dominic Thorne was not in control of the narrative. I opened my laptop and turned it to face the room. "I've prepared a presentation that details exactly what happened. But first, I should mention that I've invited some additional participants to join us." On cue, the conference room door opened again. Veronica entered, followed by the head of HR, Imani Wells, and 2 members of the firm's board of directors. "Ms. Holloway informed us of some concerning allegations," said Roland Burke, the eldest board member. "We felt they warranted immediate attention." Dominic's face flushed with anger. "This is an ambush. Acacia is clearly bitter about being terminated and is fabricating these accusations." "Actually," Imani from HR interjected, "I've had concerns about certain patterns for some time, but without concrete evidence." She let the implication hang in the air. For the next 45 minutes, I methodically presented my evidence. The original environmental reports with their timestamps and authentication codes. Emails between environmental consultants expressing concern about changes made without their approval. Testimony from former employees about Dominic's pattern of behavior. And then, the piece de resistance, a recording. After I was fired, I explained. Dominic called the Westlake project manager and claimed I had been terminated for ethical violations. He specifically stated that I had been cutting corners on the environmental assessments. Fortunately, that project manager was concerned enough to record the call. I pressed play. Dominic's voice filled the room, smooth and assured as he systematically dismantled my professional reputation while simultaneously taking credit for my work. The silence when the recording ended was deafening. "That will be all, Mr. Thorne," Roland Burke said quietly. "Please wait in your office while the board confers." "This is ridiculous." Dominic snarled, standing so abruptly his chair rolled back and hit the wall. You're going to take the word of a disgruntled former employee over mine? I built this department. You built nothing, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. You took credit for other people's work. You pushed out talented women who threatened your ego. You falsified documents that could have resulted in environmental damage and legal liability for this firm. He turned to me, eyes blazing. You think your lottery money makes you powerful? You're nothing. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. I smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile I'd had in months. That's where you're wrong, Dominic. I don't need to work in this industry again. But you do. The board members escorted Dominic from the room. The rest of us sat in stunned silence until Claudia spoke. Well, she said, I believe we have a project to salvage, and it seems we're in need of a new project lead. She looked directly at me. Someone who understands the importance of integrity in our environmental approach. 2 hours later, I stood in what had been Dominic's office, watching as security escorted him from the building. Not with the courtesy they'd shown me, there was no prepackaged box, no gentle guidance. His face was twisted with rage as he was marched through the open office, past the wide eyes of the colleagues who had feared him for years. By the end of the day, 3 things had happened. Dominic Thorne had been terminated for ethical violations. I had been offered a consulting contract to rescue the Westlake project at triple my former salary, and an internal investigation had been launched into the firm's handling of employee complaints. But the most satisfying moment came 3 days later, when the industry newsletter published its weekly update. There, in the personnel section, Dominic Thorne has departed from Larson Burke Associates following concerns about project management practices. Sources close to the situation suggest Mr. Thorne may face challenges securing comparable positions due to the nature of his departure. Professional language for what was essentially career death in our tightly knit industry. I didn't take the consulting contract. Instead, I used a portion of my lottery winnings to establish a legal fund for employees facing workplace discrimination and whistleblower retaliation. I named it after Sybil, the designer who'd been told she was too emotional for client meetings. Within a month, we had 20 cases in progress. As for Dominic, I heard through industry channels that he tried to start his own firm, but potential clients kept finding those news articles about ethical violations during their due diligence. His wife, the one with old money, filed for divorce 6 months later when his financial prospects continued to dim. The last I heard, he was teaching part-time at a community college in another state. A respectable career, certainly, but worlds away from the power and prestige he'd wielded like a weapon for so long. Sometimes I wonder if my revenge was too harsh, if I could have found a way to address the injustice without destroying a man's career. But then I remember the 11 women who left the firm because of him. I remember how he tried to ruin my reputation after firing me for having good fortune. I remember the environmental report he falsified, which could have led to lasting damage to protected wetlands. And I realized that what I did wasn't revenge at all. It was accountability. It's been 2 years since that day in the conference room. My life has changed in ways I never could have predicted. The money from the lottery is mostly invested now, generating enough income that I can focus on running the legal fund full-time. I bought a modest house with a garden where I grow vegetables and flowers. I adopted a rescue dog named Prudence, who snores louder than any human I've ever met. Last month, I ran into Gwen, the junior architect who had been in that conference room. She's a project lead now at the firm, the youngest woman ever to hold the position. You know, she told me over coffee, everything changed after that day, not just because Dominic left, but because people saw that speaking up could actually make a difference. The culture is completely different now. That's the thing about power. When it's abused, it seems impenetrable, untouchable. But sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stand up, to say enough, to bring the whole structure tumbling down. I'm not saying everyone who's been wronged can or should do what I did. I had advantages: financial security from the lottery, documented evidence, and allies willing to take risks. Not everyone has those things. But I do believe that there's always a way to fight back against injustice. It might not be quick, it might not be easy, but there's always a path forward if you're willing to be strategic, patient, and brave. My phone buzzes with a notification. Another case has been referred to our legal fund. Another person finding their voice against someone who thought their power made them untouchable. And that, more than the money or the satisfaction of watching Dominic's downfall, is the real prize. Knowing that what happened to me won't happen so easily to someone else. So if you're watching this and you're in a situation where someone with power is abusing it, know that you're not alone. Know that there are people out there fighting for you, people who understand what you're going through. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Drop a comment below if you've ever stood up to someone who thought they were untouchable. I read every single one. And if you want to see more stories about finding justice in unexpected ways, subscribe to my channel. Because while this chapter of my life has closed, there are so many more stories waiting to be told. Remember, money can buy influence, but it can't buy integrity. And in the end, integrity always wins.